To begin with with this press conference, I would like to introduce to you a friend of mine, Darakshan Raja. Darakshan is a Pakistani Muslim immigrant woman from the Bronx who moved to Washington, D.C. in order to impact social policies. She has worked on a range of issues, including organizing against anti-Muslim racism and state violence, gender-based violence, human rights abuses, and the national security system and the criminal justice system. She is a co-founder of the Muslim American Women's Policy Forum and serves on the advisory board for API, Domestic Violence Resource Project in DC, an organization that serves API survivors of domestic violence and physical assault. Most recently, Darakshan worked with the Urban Institute Justice Policy Center on a range of criminal justice evaluations spanning across crime victims' rights, juvenile justice, gang violence, and violence against women. Darakshan holds a master's in forensic psychology and hopes to strengthen grassroots support and resources for activists and organizers directly impacted by state violence, and to increase collaboration between movements to move towards intersection, organizing, and collective liberation.
Thank you so much, Sierra, for introducing me, and also to everyone here for holding this tribunal. The role that I'm actually going to play today is more as the co-director of the Washington Peace Center, an organization that's local here to Washington, D.C., sort of started out as it's a strategic place for providing education, resources, and support for mobilization. We have a long history of being involved in the anti-war movement. During the Vietnam War, we were a center for draft resistors, and since then, have been pretty consistent in terms of being against war in its entirety. And before I go into my particular remarks, I do want to center the space and say that we must remember that Iraqis have paid the price for really sustaining our country, which is built upon white supremacy. It's a settler colonial state, it's capitalist, and it's patriarchal. And millions have been killed since the 90s. The occupation in Iraq did not start in 2003, it started way before then. And the US involvement in the larger region of Middle East, North Africa, South Asia has been going on really for a very long time. It's really that we've seen this escalation of violence. This outright occupation of nations does not just happen in the beginning. There's so much more that pretexts that. And then in the same time, to really center the resistance of the Iraqi people, the reason we are here, the reason we hear these stories, that is a testament to their survival, to how they've resisted, to how they still organize. And that for us, as particularly being in the United States, we're not neutral parties. Whether we agree with this war or not at the individual level, we're living in a structure and a system that does support the war. And through that, we are financially supporting through tax dollars this entire apparatus. And so it's really important that as we enter into this conversation, that we do not view ourselves as neutral parties, even if at the individual level, even if as organizations, we are completely against this war and US imperialism and its masses. At the same time, being a Pakistani Muslim woman who has myself been impacted by war, and even that my entire identity as of right now, the Muslim communities, the racialization of Muslim with Pakistani, Iraqis, Syrians, you name it, has been racialized in the context of the national security system. So when we talk about the mass support for this, it really comes from the idea that my humanity is only as relevant as your national security. And so that undermines why there's apathy towards this issue, and also why there hasn't been the kind of public outrage and outpouring that we need. We are living as Muslims right now domestically being seen as your foreign bodies of security threats in the context of war. That is what I operate within. And so if you are doing any work also around Islamophobia or xenophobia, it's important to remember that the pillar in which we are being positioned is that justification of US militarism, and it's deeply connected to the violence that is happening in our home countries, in the communities that we come from. The other thing I want to talk about is that a lot of times in our movements, we speak about the cost of war. We know that within Iraq, it will probably cost us about $2 trillion and even more so. At the macro level, we can make this argument and say that we know that this guts social services, it guts the true things that local communities need. But where we have a disconnect is that the military, the war apparatus has been so normalized that it markets itself as being profitable and as being part of your survival. My entry point into this work very much came about a few years ago as a young student in the Bronx, working class, in immigrant communities, in Black communities. And there, the military's presence was there since public high school. It was normal. It was normal to have folks say, join the military. But the military was positioned as a way for you to leave York, to have class mobility, rather than being seen as poor folks that are turning around and leeching off social welfare, that this was your ticket to respectability. You would be serving the nation. You would be serving the country. And so as I joined as an intern AFSC in their Other Options to Militarism program and went into my own community, I was devastated to find that there were more military recruitment centers than there were schools, than there were actually local community centers. And as I went to speak to these military recruiters who were Black and brown, who looked like me, they would say things such as, you could get your citizenship if you joined the military. This is an easy 40,000 right now, just sign up. We're talking about in a community where, for me as someone who was taking care of my family, my annual income was about $20,000. For in that condition to be given $40K when you're only about 19 years old, just think about the way that they are selling the military. There were other things that they would say, such as, many people do not have the money and funds to forget traveling abroad or traveling to other parts of the country. They don't even have transportation money to take the subway or to go to work. And here was someone telling you, this is going to be your free trip to the world. You can go to Japan. You can go to the Middle East. And so that is how they would position it. And then there's also a context here of particularly the hyper-masculinity, the ways in which the men were being sort of seen with cars and having money and looking a certain way. And so when we talk about trying to organize against this military infrastructure, this military system, I don't think that our movement has actually really sat down and thought about how war positions itself in America, how it makes itself look lucrative. We know in the end that, yes, veterans are coming back with PTSD, people have committed suicide, Black and brown folks who joined the military also face massive violence, but that is not the story that they tell you. The story that they tell you is, this is your economic viability, this is your respectability, this is your ticket out of the hood. And so again, in our movement, when I look around and I see folks with class privilege sitting here, I worry that how disconnected we are at this moment when we have a Trump administration that is deeply built upon xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, and when they're promising that they're going to bring jobs, I think we should be ready that they're bringing jobs connected to the military state itself. And they're going to be working class communities who are going to go, even white working class communities who are going to work in those manufacturing companies where there are weapons, and they're going to make this individually lucrative for people who are trying to get survival. And so if our movement, again, is not going to be strategic, is not going to have an organizing center, and at the same time really center directly impacting communities. I don't mean center directly impacted communities to bring us up here to talk about our traumas and the pain, and then completely diminish us and not include us in leadership, not include us in actually directing the strategy and directing the analysis. We are far more than just weeping cries victims. We are also survivors, we're also thrivers, we're also warriors. And so it's really imperative and key that this movement, in order to really be a movement, start really shifting the way it's shown up. Thank you.